horses got to the northern areas from the Mongols.
Did they cross through Russia?
Yes. Because that area where the Mongolians, where Russia is now, that's where they lived. There were more northern ones too.
Okay, they were the northern Mongolians, which would be what we now call Russia. Those Mongolians brought horses through that way through Russia and over toward. Okay.
Those hardy, cold horses. That's why the fjord horses look like the Mongol horses, because they're from the same back stocks.
They're the sturdy, cold weather, hardy variety.
Yes.
Did the Mongols and the northern peoples have
Trade?
a lot of trade interactions?
Some of them. Like I said, there were a certain section of people who traded with them. Because, here's the thing, the Viking northern peoples were not just in the Scandinavian area. They covered all of Siberia.
Yeah, it's the Arctic Circle people all the way around.
Yeah.
From the Americas, and Alaska, and the Bering, all the way around, all the northern peoples.
All traded with each other.
Because, even though technically the distances were far...
Not as far as you think.
It's
in the winter?
Oh, they just went over the top in the winter?
Yeah.
That's pretty darn cold. I mean, really cold.
Some of them. Not all of them. Those are the ones that lived at the top of the northern peoples. Would just go, okay, we'll just keep going, travel back and forth over the ice. And it only took maybe a month or two to travel all the way across. Because they had these, like, sled boats. They didn't do it by foot.
So it was like a boat, but it was like a sled.
Yeah, and they would use the winds.
Ooh. Okay, that sounds really beautiful and like the basis or plot line for some fantastical stories.
Yes. Especially with the northern lights shining on them.
Oh my goodness.
Because the northern lights would shine off the ice.
Yes. Talk about fantasy. That was a very fantastical...
Yeah, they would use the winds on the sled boats to travel across the ice in the winters.
Wow.
So there would be trade between the top swath of the northern peoples and, like, the Inuit. Because back then the ice cap was a lot bigger. It was solid. So you could even travel into the spring and still be fine. And it would have been year-round you could travel back and forth. But here's the thing. They would basically hibernate in the summer when the sun was up the whole time. Because otherwise they went crazy. They did more sailing at night, navigating by the stars and the winds.
Oh. That makes complete sense.
That's how the midnight sun didn't drive everyone nuts. They basically hibernated like a bear.
They had dark
cave-like
places, deep where light couldn't get in.
Yeah.
And they just basically went in there and would hibernate and totally block out the midnight sun.
Yes. I mean, they would like wake up to eat and stuff, but for the most time they just slept. But by that case, they would be more awake during the night, when the night would come.
So they were more of a nocturnal
people, yes. Because night was better for navigating. And with the northern lights, which were constant at that time, it's not like now where they go in and out. They were pretty much constant, and the Milky Way up there, reflecting off the ice, you could see really far. But when the sun hit the ice, it blinds you. So you couldn't see at all.
Were they... okay. Were they... Did they have like a home base where they were out like most of the time, and then they would travel just a little bit, or they tended to be...
They tended to travel a lot.
So they were sort of semi-nomadic then.
Yes.
Yes. They would have a place where they would do their hibernating during the summer, and that would be their home base.
That
would be their home base. But then
the rest of the year they
tend to be nomadic.
Yes. These were the people who live in what you call Siberia now.
This is the upper edge of where humanity lives.
Yes. And they actually had a physical adaptation. They had an extra layer of fat right under the skin. And they were very stocky.
They're not the long, willowy...
No.
They were stocky and had an extra layer of fat right under the skin.
Think sort of Ice Dwarf Lord of the Rings. But picture them in ice rather than stone mountains. They were the origin of the trolls.
Oh. Do those peoples still have descendants today?
Not really. Maybe a few had like a barest fraction of it left, but they might come back. We don't know for sure, but once things get cleaned up and stabilized...
Were they taken out on purpose? Or do you know?
I'm not going to go into that story right now.
But there were these navigating, semi-nomadic... I mean, it sounds fantastical.
Yes.
It just sounds like a...
That's why they had in legends, trolls turn to stone when the sun hits them.
Oh!
They were the Traawlers.
The Traawlers, not the trolls, the Traawlers.
Or that's the closest word you have.
Yes.
It was pronounced more like trawl, not troll.
Trawl. Were the Traawlers just humans with an adaptation, or were
yes.
they?
Yes, they were human.
Okay, they were humans with an adaptation.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, it had a flat bottom. The boat had a flat bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like a curved, pointed bow.
Was the bow like the bow of
Viking ships?
Viking
Yes.
ships.
So it had that curved, decorative thing. Because that was very important for navigation. But they were wider.
The boats themselves were wider?
Wider and flat-bottomed. And you wouldn't see just one. You would see many traveling together.
Okay, so it would be about how many people would be in a single boat, sled, trawler?
Maybe about 50? Because they were very large. Because they were like a little town.
And there would be more than one of them at the same time. So
going across the ice.
So if there's anybody's one has a problem, there's other ones there to help and assist with whatever the problem may be.
Yes.
Did they carry with them like animals, or was it just mainly just the people?
Not really animals.
So basically the people would just travel in this, and they would be on these for about a month or so at a time?
month or two to get across to Northern America.
And then they'd get there, they'd be there for a little while, then they'd go back. So it's like basically lived on this a good portion of
their lives.
I would say probably like 3/4 of the year they were on the boats, and then
And then the midnight sun they would hibernate.
and then when it got too bright, then they would go into the hibernation.
Yeah.
How did they get vitamin D? Because vitamin D is like a.
They didn't need it.
They didn't need vitamin D.
That's what the fat was for.
Oh, okay.
The fat would create vitamin D. The fat was the adaptation for the vitamin D.
Vitamin D is a fatty type vitamin.
Yeah.
So they would eat that vitamin D would be stored under their skin.
Yes.
In a fat layer, and that's how.
And they didn't have pale skin. They had very dark skin. They had darker skin, the type of skin like in India. Not dark, but
it wasn't fair pale with blue eyes and
no,
almost white. Theirs was a darker tone of skin. They had dark hair.
They had more reddish hair.
Reddish.
Yeah.
So they had like
and green eyes.
They had reddish hair, green eyes, and like a tanner color, a darker, medium tone skin.
Yes. That is where the red hair and green eyes trait comes from.
Oh.
That is why it is rare. Oh.
What?
They would also have freckles, and they would tattoo constellations in the freckles.
Oh.
As part of their history story of themselves.
So the red-haired, green-eyed, freckled people, that trait comes from the Traawlers.
Yes. Especially curly red hair. Not the straight red hair. The straight red hair came from someone else.
Oh, the curlier red hair with the freckles and the green eyes, that came from the Traawlers.
Yes.
That trait comes from Traawlers.
Yes.
I've noticed that many times those people who have those traits also tend to have high cheekbones.
Yes.
Is that also a Trawler trait?
I'm not sure.
Because the high cheekbones goes with the stockier build.
Okay, yes, then yes. But with the layer of fat, it was harder to tell where the bone structure was. But yes, the curly red hair, the strong, dark freckles, and the green eyes,
and stocky build,
are all traits of the Trawler.
A lot of that exists in Ireland.
Yes.
Ireland is known.
That is one of the few places left where the Trawler genes remain.
Remains pretty.
Because Vikings were not blonde and blue-eyed.
Lots of Scandinavians are blonde and blue-eyed, but they were.
That's after the fact. That's after history.
Okay.
True northern peoples were not that. In the time period I'm speaking of.
And we're talking way a long time ago, not later on.
Almost Ice Age. Back up there would still be considered Ice Age.
So during the Ice Age, that the true northern peoples were not blonde-haired, blue-eyed people.
No. And even, say, in your biblical time period, they wouldn't be the blonde and blue-eyed. That came from more the France-German area, and they migrated up north. So there was some interbreeding, but because you will be blinded
if you're
that fair,
and you're light skinned when you go out onto the ice,
you get instantly sunburned.
Yes.
And you couldn't see the person on the ice. So having the darker skin and the red hair, you could spot someone on the ice.
Now, were all of the Trawlers mostly red-haired, or did they have some that had darker hair too?
There were some with darker hair too, but it varied. But there was a definite red trait.
They could be anywhere from really red to darker with some red undertones.
Yes.
It wasn't a uniform.
No. And one thing they loved to do was put little like gems and stones in their curls. Just for decoration. Like beads. Like the curls would force her hair hold the beads.
They could put beads in their hair. Well, did they have incredibly good night vision?
Oh, impeccable night vision.
Because if they were basically slept during daylight hours, then...
Well, I also think there was no light pollution then. So the Milky Way was much brighter. And the ice would reflect the starlight and the northern lights.
So they had light, but it was a different... It wasn't
type of light.
It wasn't sunlight light. It was a different kind of light they used to be able to see.
Yes.
It was like a changing magical colors of the northern lights.
Mixed with the Milky Way.
Milky Way.
Reflected
off the ice and
snow.
And snow.
And then the moon.
And they have beads in their hair and
freckle tattoos. Constellation tattoos.
Okay, that sounds really, really... It sounds really cool to see.
Yes. Like you said earlier, it's very inspiration for fantasy.
It's sort of like that thing where George Lucas based his stories off of
other cultures, yes.
Not just other cultures. He looked for all mythologies that had common threads and many different, and he tried to tap into that. Mm-hmm. Because there's something that souls remember and know, and this sort of taps into that. When you hear it, it immediately like wakes up something and says, "Ooh, exciting, interesting." And if you lived a little bit lower and they came down to where you were, they would be like these amazingly cool traveling people from faraway lands and seeing with stories of storms and this and that and the sounds and of the that we heard over the ice in the northern parts and you can just hear their story like, oh, and all the kids like, oh, the boats have come, they've come, and they're all excited and want to hear the stories and see their things, and they have these beads in their hair, and I'm like, wow!
Tattoos on their faces and over their whole body.
They'd be like, wow!
Because when they were hibernating, that's when they would do the tattoos. Because you couldn't do it in the winter. When you hunker down and got bored.
And it's a little bored, you just start drawing. Okay, that's just lovely. Well, this was an extremely, not just interesting, but inspiring, the stories we could tell.